Last week, we were very dismissive of these rumors linking Florida State and Clemson to the Big 12. We might have been wrong.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is just a wild time to be a college sports fan. We are Locked On ACC. Thank you so much to the everydayers for making us your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On this episode, we will talk about all of the crazy travel miles that most ACC teams will rack up this year, except one program. It's going to be like nothing changed with the new West Coast teams in here. We did see after the ACC got a W in court midweek last week, Clemson returned the favor and handed the ACC an L. But Kenton, these Big 12 rumors about adding Florida State and Clemson, not only will these rumors not go away, I finally feel like someone who's pretty reputable has gone out on a limb about this. Now, I'm not to say he's the only reputable reporter who's talked about it, because this whole buzz started midweek last week because Ross Dellinger from Yahoo, who's a great reporter, he speculated, but he was very careful in the context. Like, this is me hypothesizing. I'm not reporting anything. So, within the context of what Ross Dellinger said, I wasn't going too crazy about these Big 12 Florida State Clemson rumors. Now, for what this is worth, Jason Scheer, who's an Arizona and now Big 12 insider, and from what I can tell is more reputable than most of the people who comment on conference realignment, just to set the table here. Jason Scheer sends an X post out on Sunday that said, according to sources, there is an internal belief in the Big 12 that Florida State and Clemson are likely to join the conference within the next year or so. So again, I guess, his report is there is internal, but I don't know who that is internally, if he's talking to Mark, the commissioner, if he's talking to other conference officials. But I got to say, Kenton, Scheer is going a little bit more out on a limb than most of the other reputable reporters are, that maybe the Big 12 could end up being the move for FSU and Clemson.
No, we need a segment where I can just laugh, where I can laugh from my diaphragm.
Just for 10 minutes.
Well, I just need 10 minutes just to point and laugh here, because this is so ridiculous and so stupid on all parts. And let me say this. I was wrong. Let me acknowledge that right now. Donno acknowledged it, so let me acknowledge it too. I was wrong. I didn't imagine a world where either side would be foolish enough to try to make this marriage work. Donno, I didn't get it. I did, because from Clemson and Florida State side, you're leaving for money. Why are you going to a conference with the exact same payout, if not lower, than what you're currently getting paid? Why would you go to that conference, right? On their end, it doesn't make sense. Right. It just didn't. And then you hear about the private equity, and they will have an influx of cash. How big is this influx of cash going to be is the question. Because then you go from – but we talk about Clemson to Florida State. It's all about the money. That's the only thing that had to make sense for them. That's it. The travel didn't have to make sense. The academics didn't have to make sense with the Big Ten and SEC situation. We knew that wasn't necessary. The only thing that had to make sense for them was the money. The Big 12, however, has a bunch of other considerations. The Big 12 has so many other considerations. You talk about having to make them some of the richest paid schools in all the land. Where is that money coming from? Now I'm hearing that allegedly there's supposed to be, hey, the Big 12 will also pay their buyout. Again, where is this money coming from? Donno, you and I have already broken this down. They cannot redo their TV contract until when, Donno?
2031 is the date that I've seen.
2031. So that means they have to sustain at least how long without any other assistance aside from whatever they get from becoming the All-State 12 instead of the Big 12 and taking money from red herring equity. You're looking at having to sustain for how long? That's 6 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, depending on when they would actually join, right? So maybe 5 or 6 years if it happens a season or 2 seasons down the road.
And you and I did the math on this on air. And that math, which, by the way, the math that Donno and I did not account for them paying the exit fee. And that came out to, over the course of 3 years, over $1 billion. So now you're adding in an additional $250 million at minimum. That's if Florida State and Clemson whooped the wheels off the ACC in court. You're looking at adding an additional $250 million. And now you have to maintain the $4 billion plus that $250 million plus another $1 billion on top of that. And you're telling me that 6-year window where they got to stay, even if we took 1 year off, instead that 5-year window where you're on the hook for nearly $2 billion is going to be paid for, not in part, but in full by somewhere else? And here's the last part of the considerations that I don't think the Big 12 is making. Okay. These two schools just showed that they will leave for higher paid, greener pastures. Correct, Donno?
That is a good point. They are setting the precedent there.
If they just left they went from the smallest house on the block to the second smallest house. And you don't think that the two bigger houses are people they're thinking about leaving you for? It is mind-numbing to see some of the way that these things are playing out. It is mind-numbing to see that the Big 12 would take on the fool's errand of saying, hey, we will find an additional $2 billion before we even get into restructuring a TV deal just for you two. Amazing.
It's like, okay, so if we just strictly look at this numbers wise, and obviously a lot of these numbers are estimates because we don't right. actually know what the buyouts would be. That's why these court cases are ongoing between Florida State, Clemson, and the ACC. But this is probably like for your mark and Big 12 conference leadership, they're probably looking at this a different way than just doing the math, right? Because if they can feel like in this ever-evolving conference realignment landscape where there is the gap is getting so much bigger, like for many years, the SEC and the Big Ten have been the top two conferences, but we never had this kind of separation. So in your Mark's mind, he might be thinking, you know what, sometimes you have to spend money to make money. You have to take some risky moves in order to compete. And he might be saying, you know what? Yeah, we're going to have to take on, I guess you're not technically taking on debt when you take on private equity, but you got mouths to feed. You're essentially giving up an ownership stake in your conference to private companies. So yeah, it's financially risky, but in their minds, they might be thinking, if we allow the Big Ten or the SEC to snatch up the Florida States and the Clemsons, and who knows who else from the ACC may become available in the next, several years. If we allow them to make that gap even larger, our only chance at survival is to try to make risky moves like this. That if we can make a financially enticing move to get Florida State and Clemson, then who knows? Maybe they go after Miami. A lot of people saying, would they go after Notre Dame? I mean, Notre Dame's still doing a darn good job being independent. We'll see if that changes. They don't seem to be in any rush to join a conference anytime soon, but we see those rumors out there. The Big 12 may be saying, you know what? Yeah, these are financially risky moves, but it's our only hope at survival and competition. If we can become a Big 3 rather than have a Big 2 where they're looking down on us, maybe that's probably their mindset here.
Here's the problem with that. Does adding Clemson and Florida State make you a Big 3 conference de facto because they're there? No. If that was the case, the ACC would be seen as the third marker of the Big 3. Like,
very good point.
It's blowing my mind. I'm going to tell you this. I will give them the credit of this because I know lots of Big 12 folks are going to come in here and get mad at me and say that I'm saying they're a bunch of idiots and all that stuff. I'm going to say this, Mr. Yormark, Big 12 country. I will say what I said about y'all, what I said about the Lions GM, Brad Holmes, what I said about him in last year's draft or 2 years ago draft when they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Porter. I'll say the same thing about the Big 12 that I said about him. This will go down. If this move actually comes to fruition, you will either go down as a legend or an idiot. No in between. There is no moment where you're just going to be like, oh, yeah, your Mark was all right. He wasn't terrible. He wasn't great. If this thing goes off successfully, if he successfully pulls off this Queen's Gambit, he's going to be known as one of the greatest commissioners of all time. However, if this ends how I suspect it will, crashing, burning with Clemson and Florida State still jumping ship for greener pastures again, saying again, Hey, wait a minute. Didn't we just get out of a contract that everybody thought was ironclad to get more pay? Let's go for 2. Let's do it again. Let's see how we can do that.
Here's another thought that I had, because I always imagine that all these different parties, somebody's playing 4D chess here, okay?
Right.
So in recent weeks, we've heard some reports that maybe the Big Ten is not as interested in Florida State and Clemson than people make it out to be. Now, for obviously, if that's the case, not only would Florida State and Clemson need to have backup plans with joining the Big 12 being one of those, because you can't stay in the ACC now. I mean, you've already crossed that bridge. You're suing the conference and they're suing you. You can't stay in the ACC. That's no longer a viable option. So, yeah, not only do you have to have the backup plan, which the Big 12 is a good backup plan, obviously, but then aren't you also maybe putting some pressure on the Big Ten, Kenton, to say, hey, you know what? If you guys don't want us, or if you don't have enough urgency to bring us in, we'll go over and join this other conference, and you guys will lose out on what we can add. There could be some negotiating pressure that could be coming from this as well.
But that's what I think this is. That's what I think this is more than anything. I don't for a second suspect that Clemson or FSU is actually going to do this. I really don't, because again, the numbers just don't work out when we're talking the estimates here. So what I think this is more than anything else is, all right, if you don't want us, I'll go ahead and talk to this person over here. If you don't want me, I could date somebody else. Obviously I'd never actually date this person. I'd never be happy over here. What do you mean? This person isn't my type at all. But I'm gonna make you a little jealous. I'll make you a little jealous. I'm gonna flirt a little bit. I'm gonna accept the drink. We're gonna get on the dance floor and cut a rug a little bit just to show you I ain't afraid to do this thing. And so I think that's what this is more than anything else, because you and I talked about this before. If the SEC and the Big Ten are like, what do we really gain from this? You need another party that's going to apply that pressure, that's going to put that vice grip on and say, hey, I'll do it. And it's clear, if Florida State and Clemson are to make the maximum amount possible, then the Big 12 would have to basically go all in, put everything on the line to get them. But imagine this. What if they're putting everything on the line is equivalent to what the SEC or the Big Ten could do when they're just like, all right, sure, whatever. All right. They'll give you 45. We'll give you 50. That's it. That's all we're going to do for you. That's it, okay? You don't have to come in partial. You can come in full. We're not paying your exit fee, but we'll come in at 50. I feel like that would be a situation where this thing would work out in their favor. And also, you and I keep talking about this part that nobody is really mentioning, the legality of all of this. How are you knee-deep in conversations with another conference when you're already in a conference? Now, I don't know about Florida, but North Carolina has a law called alienation of affection, where if your spouse is cheating on you, you can sue them for that. Now, this is legal talk that we're talking here. This is legal talk that we're talking here in terms of business. This is not just marriage. This is business. Yeah. And you cannot, I'm pretty sure there's something in that contract that says, hey, you can't be out here negotiating with other conferences. You're here. While you're here. Be where your feet are. Maybe I'm wrong. I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again. We get on here and talk a lot, so we're not going to be right all the time. But I'd love to see how this thing shakes out. I wish I had a crystal ball to see how this thing is going to go in 3-4 years from now.
Well, we might be maybe a step closer to Clemson's exit. We'll explain why when we come back. You want to keep it locked right here. Brand new episode of Locked On ACC. We're not done yet. I'm certainly not done with eBay Motors. Guys, eBay Motors has bailed me out so many times. Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championships. And it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Thank you for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Again, I'm going to recommend making Locked On Big 12 your second listen and watch today, because my guy Drake Toll is going to be all over this. I think I'm going to be joining Drake Toll for Miami Big 12 crossover later on this week. So you want to make sure you tune into that. And Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. It's called Locked On Sports Today, and it's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So Kenton, Friday in Pickens County, South Carolina, the same week that the ACC had scored a similar small victory against Clemson in their home court in North Carolina. Clemson returned that favor on Friday. This is from thestate.com covering Clemson. South Carolina judge on Friday granted Clemson a legal, quote-unquote, win in its ongoing court battle against the Atlantic Coast Conference over the conference's grant of rights. In a Pickens County courtroom, Judge Perry H. Gravely ruled after a 3-hour hearing that Clemson's lawsuit against the ACC will continue in the Tigers' home county, since the university has, quote, established a case for specific jurisdiction. So, Kenton, the pattern has been consistent in all four. I'm not including the Florida AG's lawsuit. Right. I'll put that separate. But in all four of these other lawsuits, Florida State versus the ACC, ACC versus Florida State, ACC versus Clemson, and Clemson versus the ACC, all of these judges have been consistent in, yeah, you guys have made an argument. The case has to go forward here. So we have, again, dueling lawsuits. Clemson versus the ACC in South Carolina, ACC versus Clemson in North Carolina. None of these judges are saying, yeah, we don't have jurisdiction. All these judges want to hear it in their home venue. So these court cases will continue to duel.
What a shocker. The judges want things to proceed in their court. The judges feel like they have the ability to be the center of attention. Donno, the person who wears a long fancy gown and tells everybody to stand and rise when they walk into the room, or has a bailiff tell everybody to stand and rise when they walk into the room, is desiring to be the center of this case. I'm shocked, Donno. I'm appalled. I'm flatly appalled, But this is this is a win for Clemson in the same way that it was a win for the ACC in terms of the case can go forward. Let's get to the meat and bones of this thing. I'm tired of the appetizer. Y'all know I love me some calamari. If I'm at a Chinese spot or Asian spot, I love me some crab rangoon. But I'm ready for the main course. Let me get the I want to get into actual back and forth of who are going to be the losers out of this. That's what I'm ready for. Did I cut out right there?
You did, but you're back now, I think.
Okay. All right. I'm ready to get into the meat and potatoes of who are going to be the winners and who are going to be the losers. That's what I'm ready for. All the extras, all the semantics, all the can the case go on. We knew that none of these cases were going to get dropped outright. You and I both knew that. We knew that. So now that we're looking at that, let's see where these cases actually go. We know it's going to be a mad dash to the finish. So let's see which case gets to the finish line first and sets precedence for this thing in terms of how these cases are going to play out.
It's going to be interesting on the field this coming year to see if whoever actually wins the conference in football this year is going to be someone other than Florida State and Clemson. Those are the top two betting favorites. And we talked, I think it was early last week, about the ESPN SP Plus metrics that actually have Florida State and Clemson have a combined roughly a 51% chance to win the conference. And then the field, the other 15 teams, are at a 49%. Now on that note, Kenton, I've noticed that there's been a couple of college football experts in recent weeks are looking at a couple of sleepers. It was Greg McElroy talked about Miami being, in his mind, the most talented overall roster in the ACC, and Josh Pate from 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports, he's very high on NC State. Talked about NC State as a sleeper, and McElroy has also talked about NC State being a sleeper in the conference. So you'd have to wonder, and I know that there's been some trendy picks out there for SMU, I think it might be a little too soon for them. Louisville got to the conference finals, the final game last season. So I wonder if on the field, someone maybe a bit of a surprise might end up winning the championship this year.
In terms of looking at teams who would be a surprise, I think NC State as a surprise is a very interesting one, because talking about them as a surprise when you know that Tony Gibson coaches up defense just about as good as anybody. If you followed NC State closely, you've seen years where every linebacker except Drake Thomas went down and they were still a top defense. You saw years where everybody who put on a red and white jersey at the safety position, torn ACL, shoulder, pec blown out. Something went wrong. They were still a good defense. You've seen times where you've got lackluster play from certain parts of that unit, and they still maintain to be good enough to win a lot of ball games. Now you have a totally revamped offense. That makes a lot of sense. But I don't think that should be a surprise pick, outside of the fact that historically NC State cannot stop stepping on the rake. They cannot stop. They can't get out of their own way at times when it's like, oh, you have the pass.
Feels a lot like Miami as well.
And that's why I'm like, I don't understand how NC State is necessarily a sleeper pick. SMU, however, is a very sexy sleeper pick. I have a sleeper pick that a lot of people are going to look at me crazy. A lot of people are going to say, I'm sorry, if I'm going with a sleeper, give me the boys from Blacksburg. Give me the Virginia Tech Hokies. Yeah. That is a group that I think another year with most of their receivers coming back, they're getting a year older. They have a ton of talent in that backfield. I know that I talk about Drones and Tootin a lot, but they're not the only ones that can tote that rock efficiently on that Virginia Tech team. And their offensive line, again, they lost some pieces, but they're going to be a really, really good group. Defensively, adding Aeneas Peoples from Duke. He may be undersized, but he's a hell of a 3-tech in his own right. I talked a lot about how Virginia Tech's ability to stop the run is going to determine whether or not they get all the things that they want this year. Adding a big guy like that in the middle means something to that defense. Having everybody that's there, having most of the guys from last year come back means something. Having a group that your base package is faster than some team's speed package on the field, that means something. Having one of the best corners, not just in the conference, but in the nation now, in Mr. Strong, that means something. And I'm not sure if I look at their schedule and say there's not a world where they don't make it, at least to Charlotte. I'm not sure if they win it.
Yeah.
But saying that there's a world where Virginia Tech makes it to Charlotte, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, because to your point, there's some important stats that people don't think about as much, because obviously when you're evaluating a college football team, first things you look at recent success. Virginia Tech, a team on the rise, but they haven't had great recent success. You look at that. You look at the overall rosters. Maybe they're not a top 4 or 5 most talented team in the conference. But then a couple of other things you look at, strength of schedule, they're in, I think, the late 60s in the entire country. Like, it's not, really by Power 4 standards, their schedule is pretty easy, Virginia Tech. And the talent retention, right? They return a higher percentage of their production from last year as opposed to any other team in the ACC. So that's working for them. So I'm with you on that last point you made there. Virginia Tech, based on their strength of schedule and, the familiarity their talent has with one another, I could see them getting to Charlotte. Now, depending on who they face when they get there, obviously anything can happen in one game, but they're probably going to be overmatched. But I could see them getting there, no question about it. And then, another kind of under the radar stat that's becoming more of a thing now that you have teams from Northern California in the Atlantic Coast Conference, travel miles. I want to take a look at that when we come back, because there's a handful of teams in the ACC that are going to be racking up those frequent flyer miles. And you don't see it too often regular season college football, having to go from the East Coast to the West Coast and vice versa. That's tough for the visiting teams. We'll talk about that more when we come back. You want to keep it locked right here to this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. He's Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. And we will, throughout the week, we'll take deep dives on teams that are contenders in the conference, including NC State, including Miami, Florida State. I want to take a deep dive on Clemson this week as well. So I'm looking at travel miles, Kenton, for ACC teams this coming season. Now, it's funny because this could work in Clemson's favor. Clemson, they're just it's as if nothing changed for them. They have 0 trips out to California this year. Clemson's got 7 home games on the schedule, only 4 true road games. The other game where they're away from home is a neutral site, a quote-unquote neutral site against Georgia in Atlanta. Atlanta's not very far away from Clemson. So Clemson, they're only traveling 2,472 miles this year, not a whole lot. Then you've got Virginia. They're only traveling 3,151. Duke is traveling 4,358 miles. Pittsburgh is traveling just under 5,000 miles this year. North Carolina, 5,500 miles this year. NC State, a little under 6,300 miles. Wake Forest is traveling 7,500 miles this year. Louisville is traveling 7,500 miles this year. Virginia Tech is traveling 8,443 miles. Boston College, they always travel a lot anyway, being way far up the coast. They're traveling 9,700 miles. Syracuse is traveling over 11,000 miles. SMU at number 6 is traveling over 11,000 miles. Miami is traveling 11,500 miles. They do have a trip out to Cal this coming year. Georgia Tech is traveling 13,000 miles. Florida State is traveling a little over 13,000. And then you've got the newbies from out west. Stanford is traveling over 14,000 miles. And Cal is traveling over 20,000 miles this year, Kenton. That's 10 times more than Clemson this year.
Not only is it 10 times more than Clemson, that's more than the entire diameter of the moon. Not only is it bigger than that, it's 83% of the Earth's surface. 83%.
Wow.
That's the type of the Earth's distance in terms of miles around. That's how much this team is traveling. That is why, on top of being a roster that is objectively a little deficient of talent in comparison with the other teams in the conference, and don't get me wrong, I think Jay Nott is the man. I think that he is one of the best backs in the country. I say if you put him at the University of Michigan, you put him with Miami, you put him with Clemson, he goes on to be in New York at the end of the season. They have the highest of uphill battles. You know when your parents say, I went uphill both ways in 8 feet of snow to school when I was 6 years old? 99.99999% of the time, your parents are lying. This is a moment where Cal, these guys, looking back in years, they really can say, we traveled 20,000 miles in one season, 26 time zones in one season. And we had to figure it out. We had to make a way. So, I honestly, now that Cal's a part of the conference, I can say this with a whole, I don't care what their record is, with a whole heart and all that. I don't care what their record is. I don't care how they perform this year. This team deserves an amount of love and respect from the Cal faithful, from the Golden Bear faithful, regardless of what happens, because these guys are basically lab rats. These guys are basically walking into a situation that is untenable. It's an unprecedented moment where they're having to still go out and play despite that level of travel. And I don't know if y'all know this or not, but we can pretend like it doesn't matter, not a big deal, put the ball down, just play the game. When you are traveling that much, you cannot imagine what it's like to take on the rigors of a Cal Berkeley academic schedule and combine that with 20,000 miles of travel. My heart goes out to those guys, and they need to bring that team back every 5 to 10 years. I don't care what the record is. Just to say, the ACC team, the 2024 Golden Bears, they're back in town, everybody, because this is tough.
That's well said. So we're going to be taking deep dives on ACC teams throughout the week as we get ready for the conference media days next week. Make sure you follow Kenton at TGIF_Kenton on X. Check out his show, Locked On Wolfpack. You can check out my other show, Locked On Canes, and follow me on X at Alex Donno. And we'll talk to you guys again tomorrow on another episode of Locked On ACC, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.